What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp architectural skills tutorial for you. So this is kind of a free-form series. What I wanted to do is I wanted to start modeling out different buildings on our site that we created yesterday. So I figured I could kind of show you how I would do it, how I would set everything up, and we'll get into some various skills like modeling all the different structures and possibly even creating some roads and other stuff like that on our site. But it's just going to be a series with a lot of skills that people that work in architecture will find helpful. So if you're looking for more in-depth instruction, I also opened up registration for both of my courses, the SketchUp Essentials course and the SketchUp Essentials for Architecture, which focuses much more heavily on layout. So if you're interested in either one of those, I will link to both of them in the notes down below. But let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so between yesterday and today, what I decided to do is I decided to kind of combine these two paths that we had created yesterday. So I basically just went through the same process over here that we had gone through over here to get them on the same surface. And so what I wanted to do is I'm kind of thinking that this could be like a housing type complex in here, meaning you could have a house over here, maybe a barn over here. And so I'm going to start with the barn and just kind of generally how I would go about roughing something like that out in order to start getting it into my model. And then in the future videos, I think we can probably talk about maybe modeling a house up here, as well as possibly adding some paths and other things like that on the site. So I've been asked about that a few times. I can at least talk about a few different ways that you could do that. So to start off though, what I want to do is I'm going to start by roughing out the floor plan of my barn. And so my barn is going to be, we're going to call it something like 30 feet by 40 feet. It's going to be off this wall just a little bit. So I'm just going to pick a point. I'm not going to get super precise with it for right now. Remember, we've created our flat building pad yesterday. And so I'm going to start by just roughing out this floor plan. So we're going to say that this is going to be, we'll call it, let's go ahead and call it 50 feet long, actually. And we're going to say that it's going to be probably 30 feet wide. So we'll call it 30 feet wide, 50 feet long. And so what I'm doing is I'm modeling out my floor plan right now. And so probably one of the things I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to create a view with this object. So my whole site, now that I have the base of my floor plan kind of placed, I'm actually going to turn this site off. So I'm going to create a working view here where I can do that. And I'm going to come through and clean up some of these tags in the CAD file a little bit later. I'm not going to worry about them for right now, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have a organizational structure that actually makes sense. And so this is actually going to have to do both with your outliner as well as with your tags. So for example, your outliner right now, this first group, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to name this site. So that's going to be my site model. And then I'm also going to create a layer for site topology. So we'll call it site topology for right now. We may change that name a little bit later. One thing that I find very helpful here is if I come up here and right click, I want to turn on the tags toolbar up above. So that way, whenever I select an object, I can just adjust the tags. And remember, tags are what were previously layers. And I can go ahead and put things on a tag without having to go look for it in the entity info or anything like that. So what I've done is I've now taken this site and I've put it on a layer where I can turn it off. And it's telling me that I can't turn off the current tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here and click in this little space right here. That'll make untagged my current layer. And then I can turn off my site topology. And so for whatever reason, this didn't drop in there the first time, so we'll just drop it over there again, and now it's off. And I've got some extra stuff left over, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to get rid of that extra stuff so from the CAD file. So now what we have is we have our barn. And so I'm going to do a view animation, and I'm going to add a scene. And for this scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this barn underscore working. So that's going to be my working view, right? So now I've created a scene that has my barn in it. I'm also going to create another scene. So I'm just going to right click and I'm going to click add. You can actually rename this up here as well. And we're just going to call this overall underscore working. And so my overall working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my site on. And I'm just going to right click and I'm going to update this. So now I have a view where I can get my overall site. And we can go ahead and right click on this and we can update this. I also have a view where I can just work on my barn. And so now let's go ahead and let's model out our barn footprint. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up these layers really quick because I don't really need them anymore and they're just going to get in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of all of them except my contour layers. And so depending on how complex this gets to be, you might want to model these as separate models. So you might want to think about modeling your barn as its own model in a separate file. I'm not planning on getting super in-depth on this, so I'm going to go ahead and try modeling it in here. We may still end up moving that to another model so that we can work on it separately away from our site, but for right now we'll leave it as is. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to rough out the structure of this barn. And so what this barn is going to be, and we can go ahead and we can drop a couple dimensions in here just so we can see it for right now to remind us what the size is. Right now this barn has a footprint of 50 foot long, 30 feet wide. And so what I want to do is I want to start by roughing out our structure. And so I know with my barn, and I'm going to go ahead and select this and make it a group just so that my geometry isn't merging. But I know that with my barn right now, I'm going to have a structural spacing of, we'll call it every 10 feet, just for simplicity's sake. You might be able to get away with something a little bit different, but for right now, I'm just going to use the tape measure tool and I'm going to start creating guides every 10 feet. So all I'm doing, whoops, that's 10 inches, is I'm activating the tape measure tool, and then I'm clicking on this point and I'm tapping the control key to make sure that I'm in create guide mode, and then I'm just typing in a length. So you can see how I'm just basically drawing a structural grid in here showing me every 10 feet. So just something like this. And so now I know that I can come in here and I can start modeling out the structural posts that are going to make up my barn. So for example, this structural post, we're going to call this probably a 6x6. So really it's going to be 5.5 by 5.5. So we'll just type in 5.5 comma 5.5 and draw a rectangle. And so what that rectangle has done is that's given us basically the size of a 6x6 post. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to extrude this up, and we'll call our sidewalls 12 feet for right now. So that may be a little bit tall for a barn, but we'll call it good at the moment. So then I'm just going to take this whole thing and I'm going to triple click on it. I'm going to make it a component. The reason I'm going to make it a component is because we're going to reuse this multiple different times. And I want to set this up so if I adjust one of them, I can adjust the others as well. And so for this situation, we're going to call this structural column. You can put as much information in here as you want. I'm going to do 6x6 dash 12 foot high. And again, you can call these whatever you want. This is just how I'm staying organized. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on create. So what I've done now is I've created this structural post right here. Well, now what I want to do is I want to use the move tool in copy mode. So I'm just going to tap the M key, and that'll activate the move tool, and I'm going to tap the control key, and then I can just click on this point, and I'm going to move my mouse and I can create a copy. And so notice how when I create this copy, the original one stays in place. And I haven't clicked anywhere at the moment, so I'm just going to type in times 4 and hit the enter key. And notice how this doesn't work exactly right because the spacing gets kind of weird because this one's on a corner, the others are centered on this column line. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to manually drop 1. Then I'll use the move tool in copy mode to create a copy over here. I'll type in times 2 or times 3 and hit the enter key. And then I'll create a final copy on this corner. So I have my structural posts on this side right here. Well, now what I want to do is I want to take all of these. I just want to drag a box across them. I just want to use the move tool in copy mode in order to copy these over here. So what I've done is I've now created my structural posts on this side and my structural posts on this side. And depending on what level of detail you want to get into, you might or might not model out these actual structural pieces. So for example, something like a pole barn, it's a lot simpler to do this, and you're probably going to want to show this on your plans. But if you're doing something like a house, you might not want to model out the individual framing pieces because you don't really benefit a whole lot. And so one thing I've noticed that's wrong already is this is 30 feet wide. Well, I want this to be on 12-foot bays, not on 10-foot bays. And so what that means is this needs to be 36 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click in here, select this edge, then use the move tool to move this edge out an additional 6 feet. And notice how, because this was locked to this corner, this is adjusting right here. And then I can just take all of these and just use the move tool in order to move them over. But be mindful of what your bay spacing is. So for example, this one's every 50 feet. I've got it on 50 feet, and these are on 10-foot centers. You could also go to like a 48-foot and have it on 12-foot centers instead. But we'll go ahead and leave that for right now. What I want to do is I want to rough out my door. So I'm just going to draw a line right here, and I'm assuming my door is going to be 12 feet wide. So I'm going to draw a 6-foot line from the center that way, and then a 6-foot line from the center that way. And so what that's allowed me to do is that's now given me an inference point from which I can move a structural column to that point. So you can see how now what I have is I have a structural column here, and then I can use the move tool in copy mode to move the other structural column right here. So you can see how we have our opening to be 12 feet wide. And then we're just going to move these across using the move tool in copy mode, just like this. And so now what I want to do is I want to figure out how tall my barn is going to be. And so that's going to have something to do with the slope that you want the roof to be. So for example, your sidewall over here is going to be 12 feet high, right? Well, depending on what you want your slope to be for your roof, that's going to affect how tall your central point is going to be. And so now I'm going to go in and I'm just going to model out a truss. And it's going to be very simple. I'm not going to get super in-depth on truss modeling in this video. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to model this truss out as if it was made of 2x4s. So I'm just going to draw a shape right here. We'll call it 3.75 inches thick. And this is usually where I get a bunch of comments about how my trusses aren't exactly right, and you are correct. They are not going to be exactly right, but they're going to work for what we're doing for this particular tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push-pull this back. Again, 3.75. No. I'm going to push-pull this back 1.75 inches. And then I'm going to use the protractor tool in order to set my slope. So I'm just going to activate the protractor tool, single click here. And honestly, what you could do is you could use this in order to set your slope on the face of this truss. So for example, let's say you wanted this to be a 4 to 12. You could just draw a line that goes up 4, goes over 12, and then you could use the protractor tool in order to start setting that slope. So you could use the protractor tool in order to create a guide, and make sure you've tapped control to put this in create guide mode. But now you can see what the slope of this truss would be. So probably what I would do is draw a guide line straight up and then draw a guide line across like this. All right, and so what I've done here is I've kind of roughed out this shape, and then I'm just going to use the offset tool to offset this out a little bit. So we're going to call it the thickness of a 2x4, so 3.75. And then remember, this is the central point of our roof, so we want to draw a line up and erase out this extra that we've created right here. So now what I want to start doing is I want to start just roughing out my truss shape. Again, I know probably not exactly the way that a truss would look. That's okay for this exercise. So I'm just going to draw a line straight up from this midpoint. I'll draw a line down to this midpoint, and then a line right here for this midpoint. And then I'm going to erase this out. And then I'll offset this in 1.875, so half of the width of a 2x4. Kind of shave off this extra, and then we'll do the same thing to the outside. So 1.875. And then we'll clean up this corner over here. We'll erase out these faces. And then we'll push pull this across in order to give this our thickness. Notice that sometimes when you push pull across like this, you get kind of this hollow face. And we don't necessarily want the hollow face, so what we're going to do is we're going to tap the control key, move our mouse over. Notice when we tap the control key, we go into create new face mode, and this isn't hollow anymore. So I'm just going to extrude this across, and you may need to flip some faces, that's okay. But for right now, we're just going to tap that control key again. And now we have half of our truss. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reverse these faces. Then I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm just going to triple click on it. And there's two ways you could go about this. You could either copy this raw geometry straight across, or you could make this truss half a component so that you only have to model half of it. I'm going to go ahead and copy it straight across for this exercise, and then we'll just use the scale tool in order to flip that. Make sure that you get this central point when you do this, but I'm just going to type in -1 and move this across. And then we can bring this back so that our pieces come together right here. And so now I'm just going to add my central 2x4. So I'm just going to type in 0.875 on one side here, draw a line across, and then 1.75 over here. And basically what we're doing is we're roughing out the size of a 2x4. So 1.75. I'm just going to use the move tool in copy mode to copy this object across. We'll draw a rectangle here, delete out this extra face that it keeps putting in here, and then we'll use the push pull tool in order to extrude this up until it intersects with our object right here. And so that may create a little extra geometry that you can delete out if you want. Just be a little bit careful, because when you erase that out, it may erase out this face, and you may have to come heal this back in. So a lot of it depends on how much you're concerned about the way that this looks. But that's a simple way to add a truss. We're going to go ahead and we're just going to triple click on this, and we're going to make it a component. And we'll go ahead and we'll call this truss. We'll call it barn truss, and we can go ahead and say that it's 36 feet wide and click on create. And so then I'm going to take this and I'm going to make a copy of it using the move tool in copy mode. So we'll just copy this until it's centered on each one of these posts, like this. And you might actually create a post coming across here. Again, it's just kind of a question of how much detail you want to get into when you're modeling this. For right now, I'm more trying to teach principles, so we're just going to do the same thing we did before. We use the move tool in copy mode and copy these across. Alright, so now I want to come through and I want to model out the roof purlins, or the pieces of wood that are going to run across here that your roof gets hooked onto. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit, just because I don't want to spend too much time on the structure of a barn as much as just how I would model it. And so what I want to do for these is these are just going to be 3.75 inches long. They're going to be 1.75 inches thick. So I want to draw a line perpendicular, 1.75. And notice that you can move your mouse in order to create that inferencing, and then I find it easiest to just use the move tool in copy mode to copy this line up and then draw a line down to this point. And I'm going to go in here and clean this up just a bit. We'll take this and move it down so it's actually aligned at the corner, and then I'm just going to extrude this across using the push pull tool. Like this. And then we're going to triple click on it and make it a component, and we'll just call it roof purlin. Then we just want to use the move tool in copy mode to create a copy of this 36 inches from your base point. So you'll just activate copy mode, move your mouse here, and type in 36 inches, and then type in something like times 10. And notice that this kind of moves around, so you can do a times 5, times 6. So as long as you don't click anywhere else, you can take that whole thing, or you can take that and adjust it by typing in a different value and the enter key. And then I'm going to take all of these, use the move tool in copy mode again to copy these across. I'll use the scale tool to flip them. And then remember that this corner right here should align with the corner of your truss. So all you have to do is just move it back to this point. And so you have now your roof structure on here as well. And just make sure that you actually get that corner point to align. Notice again, I've got this little leftover geometry that we can get rid of over here. But now we've got kind of a basic barn structure. And the only other thing I want to talk about in this video, and I may come back in and model some more structure, is now I want to talk about how to organize these. Because right now you can see how each one of these is in as its own individual piece. And so the problem with that is that makes editing things and also turning things on and off a little bit frustrating. So what we want to do is we want to go into the outliner and we want to start grouping things. And you can do this as you go as well. But for example, I'm going to take all of my trusses. I'm just going to select one, then do a shift click. To select the bottom one, I'm going to right click and I'm going to make this a group. And I'm going to rename this group and we're going to call it barn trusses. I'm going to take my structural columns and I'm going to put them in a group. I'm going to right click on these and I'm going to call this group barn columns. And notice how I can minimize these inside of SketchUp. So I can take all of these, make these a group, and we can call these barn purlins. And you don't necessarily have to put the word barn in front of those. I'm going to delete out my default model here. I like to, just so I can see what they are. But what we're going to do from that point is we're going to take these three items and possibly this group as well, and we're going to right click on all of these and we're going to make them a group. And so we're going to rename this group barn. And then we're going to add a tag for barn underscore overall. And we're going to put our barn group on the barn overall tag. So barn overall is going to be the group that we want our barn group, or it's going to be the tag that we want our barn to be on. So now I have a way of turning my barn on and off. I also have a way of turning my site on and off. So we're kind of making this modular in the sense that now we can turn off different parts and pieces. And then what I want to do is I want to create another organizational group, and I'm going to call it barn trusses. I'm going to create one for barn purlins. And then I'm going to create one for columns. And then I'm going to take each one of these groups and put them on the associated tag. And then we'll also create one for barn pad. And so now what you can do is you can come in here and you can turn the different parts and pieces on and off, which I think this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this one where it is. In the next video though, we're going to talk, I'll probably come in here and add some more detail, but we're going to talk about how we can use this model to create different plans and other things in layout now that we have this information in here. So that's where I'm going to end this video. So in the next video, we can talk a little bit about how we can use these views that we're creating in order to take this into layout. If you're looking for more in-depth instruction, note that both of my courses, the SketchUp Essentials course, which is my overall overview of SketchUp, and the SketchUp Essentials for Architecture, which really focuses heavily on layout, are both open for registration right now. So if you're interested in that, both of those links are in the notes down below. If you like this video or this series, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.